Domestic violence has been a serious ongoing problem, one that is still extremely prevalent in our society. Domestic violence is also a serious issue in sports, even though it is not often talked about or is downplayed by the media. Despite reluctance to talk about this issue, the U.S. Department of Justice reports that more than 3 women are murdered by their intimate partners every day. In order to deal with this problem, we must bring this issue to light and create more awareness to those who are affected by domestic violence in the sporting world. This issue of domestic violence in sports is not just in North America. It has become an ongoing struggle across the globe. But what exactly is domestic violence? Domestic and emotional abuse are behaviors used by a person in a relationship to control the other. Partners may be married or not married, heterosexual, gay, lesbian, living together, separated, or dating. We acknowledge the many different types of domestic violence in society. However, this short film is concentrated on heterosexual relationships in modernized societies. As can be seen, the media plays a large role in enabling domestic violence, and this will be discussed later. There also appears to be a gender difference in the perpetuation of domestic violence among both sports players and spectators. To conclude, we will discuss ways to stop this domestic violence and abuse, and future steps we can all take to ensure that this does not continue.
Violence in sports begins at the college level before it gets brought to the professional level. These shocking statistics from the National Coalition Against Violent Athletes shows how often sexual assaults occur on U.S. campuses, which can move with the players when they make it to the bigger leagues. Also, these sexual assaults lead the way to domestic assaults later in the athlete's life. 1 out of every 3 college sexual assaults are committed by athletes. Male student athletes only comprise of 3.3% of the population. However, they actually represent 19% of the total pool of sexual assault perpetrators and 35% of domestic violence perpetrators. Between the years of 1994 and 1997, an average of 1,000 charges were brought against athletes each year in the United States. In the U.S., a new incident of athlete crime emerges once every 2 days in the media. This doesn't include crimes that went unreported. 20% of college football recruits in the top 25 Division I teams have criminal records. And most appalling, a college rapist will have raped 7 times before being caught. As we can see by these horrifying statistics, there seems to be a connection between collegiate sport team membership and violent and sexual assault.
There has been much debate as to if athletes tend to contribute more to domestic violence, and Howard Nixon and Brent Webb's articles give some reasons to this debate. Athletes may be more aggressive and violent on the field because they are expected to be that way by society. Brent Webb explains that athletes may be more likely to commit acts of domestic violence for 2 reasons. Foremost, players are trained to use violence or intimidation on the field, which may make it difficult to prevent carrying over these behaviors into their personal relationships. Additionally, sports may cultivate a macho subculture that equates violence with masculinity and discredits anything considered feminine, setting the stage for violence against women. Many of these men who engage in these behaviors show exaggerated masculine attitudes, they have a pattern of antisocial behavior, and they regularly drink or binge on alcohol. Howard Nixon explains how group talk among players in the locker room can also foster antisocial talk and behaviors as well as affirm traditional forms of masculinity. Aggression is a valued trait in athletes, and their aggression can be seen to get carried outside of the realm of sports. This can be due to sport socialization. This is the theory that athletes become more aggressive because of their sport involvement. It reinforces stereotypic gender roles, which can transfer aggression into relationships and interactions outside of sport.
Between 2011 and 2015, there were 64 reported incidents of domestic violence or sexual assault committed by athletes in the Major League Baseball, National Football League, or National Basketball Association.
According to police and court documents obtained by Outside the Lines, Mayweather has been convicted 5 times for incidents dating back more than 14 years. February 2001, during an argument with Melissa Brim, the mother of his oldest daughter, Mayweather punched Melissa 3 times in the face, leaving fresh bruises. July 2001, Mayweather struck Brim in the neck while the two were shopping with their daughter. August 2003, Mayweather assaulted 2 women who were friends of his then-girlfriend Josie Harris, hitting and punching the women with a closed fist. Years later, Mayweather's conviction was vacated and dismissed. December 2003, Mayweather hit Harris, the mother of his other 3 children, in her face. A police report noted she had several visible bruises about her head. Mayweather was eventually found not guilty after Harris changed her story. But in September 2010, yet another incident with Harris, and this time Mayweather would land in jail.
Hey man, what happened with Josie yesterday?
According to a police report, Mayweather grabbed Harris by her hair and began striking her in the back of her head with a closed fist several times, and then threatened to kill her. As 2 of her 3 children looked on, Harris wrote later in a statement, "He continued to beat me in front of them, threatening to beat them the same way." Harris, as you can see in this video obtained by TMZ, was wheeled away on a stretcher. But when asked by ESPN about the incident, Mayweather denied assaulting her.
If I really did what they say I did, as far as beating a woman and stomping a woman, I'm Floyd Mayweather. They would have brought pictures out instantly. Still no pictures, no nothing.
The infamous video of Ray Rice assaulting his then-fiancée and the NFL's mishandling of the incident led to changes in the league's domestic violence policy.
I got it wrong in the handling of the Ray Rice matter.
Rice was eventually suspended indefinitely, but has since been reinstated. Mayweather, despite multiple convictions, has never faced any suspension by boxing officials.
To suggest that somehow that we should have second-guessed that punishment, I don't think that that's the role that the Nevada State Athletic Commission should be in.
Hope Solo has been one of the world's top goalies for the past decade. She's also a celebrity, whether posing for magazine covers or competing on Dancing with the Stars.
The sexy minx is out of the cage!
But her career has been marked by controversy and legal issues, including the incident last June.
Seattle's own soccer star Hope Solo eased behind bars tonight.
The 32-year-old was arrested early this morning for allegedly assaulting her sister and nephew at a home in Kirkland.
Solo was charged with 2 counts of domestic violence, but maintained from the start that she was the victim. For months, in court papers, on Facebook, and ultimately on ABC's Good Morning America, she insisted her nephew was the aggressor.
But it was a scary night.
One of the main issues is how the media covers reports of domestic violence carried out by athletes. The media tends to avoid confronting domestic violence cases by athletes directly, and when they do, it often gets glossed over.
Looks like a beach day. Are these the right bloopers? Hold on. These are NFL players on tape assaulting women, and the NFL sends this to us as oopsie daisies? Like, we're just gonna gloss over this? Let's count down the real numbers, all right? How about that? 30. The number of domestic violence cases in the NFL since 2010. 5. The number of teams that has not had a player arrested for domestic violence since 2000. That's 5 teams out of 32 teams in the entire league. Or 1.5, the average number of games that a player is suspended after he gets a domestic violence charge. Like, really? That's it? Yeah. That's crazy. No, this is up.
When the media does cover these issues, the majority of the time they are misrepresented.
Floyd, by and large, has gotten a free ride from the media. I have a lot of respect for the way he practices his craft. But in terms of the way he treats women in particular, he's not a role model.
Sport broadcasting is based in gender stereotypes, which serves to perpetrate inequalities found in society. The meaning of violent acts towards women is generated in a socio-cultural context that fosters, shapes, and justifies the use of violence to maintain a male-dominated status quo. All too often, incidents of domestic abuse continue to be regarded as less serious than other crimes. This is further explained by a study done by Kim Tofoletti. Because sports are viewed as a male-dominated area, much news coverage puts the athlete in a power position. where they are viewed as idols. The media often portrays the players facing allegations of domestic violence as being confused and innocent, and all too often male athletes do not take responsibility and end up blaming their actions on their stereotypical male traits.
And actual convictions, and no governing body has ever suspended you or sanctioned you. What message do you think that sends victims of domestic violence?
I'd say I want everybody to tune in May 2nd. Mayweather versus Pacquiao. This is a fight that you can't miss.
You have no desire to answer that question?
And I'm blessed to be where I'm at.
Male sexuality is seen as an intrinsic and uncontrollable trait, and some men claim that it is a woman's responsibility to ensure she does not elicit male desires. This sexualizes female victims of domestic violence and frames them as unstable, obsessive, and adoring. This frames the incident in a way that discredits the victim and lays blame on their actions, rather than calling for the athletes to take responsibility.
Although there is not definitive evidence as to whether athletes are more likely to batter domestic partners over non-athletes, the point is that players should be disciplined for domestic violence in order to set a positive example for children and the community to promote non-violent relationships. As stated in an article written by Brant Webb, professional sport leagues have a more compelling need to combat domestic violence than many other social institutions. This is because masculine sports shape the dominant culture in America, and violent attitudes against women can be formed simply by watching these games on television. Also, in sports such as football and hockey, assaults that would be illegal off the field have become an accepted and even celebrated part of the game. This gives the leagues added responsibility to send a message to the audience that this behavior is inappropriate outside of the game. Actions by the leagues that discipline abusers could still have a positive impact and set an example for other social institutions, which can help to stop domestic violence against women in sport.
Most leagues, both professional and amateur, have a code of conduct. This is a way to police what players do off the field and discipline those who break the code. For example, the NFL commissioner may discipline players who participate in conduct detrimental to the welfare of the NFL. Many other leagues have started to mimic this idea of player punishment based on what's best for the league, opposed to doing what's best for creating an equitable and safe society. But how well do these codes of conduct and league policies really work? Major baseball leagues are given the authority to terminate a player's contract if the player fails to conform his personal conduct to the standards of good citizenship or good sportsmanship. However, the league commissioner can decide what conduct is or is not in the best interest of baseball. This means that they can decide which actions to impose as they deem appropriate. In addition, the MLB currently has no policy requiring the suspension of players convicted or charged with domestic abuse. The MLB's new 2015 policy states that the commissioner will decide on appropriate discipline with no minimum or maximum penalty under the policy. Players may challenge such decisions to the arbitration panel. How is this helping the fight against domestic abuse? What is this saying about women's rights and safety in our society?
The NBA currently has no consistent policy on how to punish players convicted of or charged with domestic violence. The league has no policy to punish players that are convicted with domestic violence and rarely punish players that are arrested for domestic violence. The NFL adopted a new policy after the Ray Rice incident invoked a lot of criticism. The sweeping policy states that for first-time offenders of domestic violence, they will face a 6-game suspension, and second-time offenders will face lifetime suspension. Although this appears to be a huge step in the right direction, there is a lot of criticism on how this policy is implemented. Overall, leagues seem to be hesitant to address the problem of domestic violence in professional sports. The most likely reason for this is because of potential economic implications. You see, by showcasing competition between the best athletes, the league creates competitive and popular games for the fans to watch. But the quality of the league is largely dependent on quality of the players within it. The economic success of leagues greatly depends on the revenue received from television contracts, of which each team receives an equal share off of, and uses this to pay for most of its players' salaries. If a high-profile player in any league is suspended for an act of domestic violence, this could result in fewer quality players, which means less competitive and less exciting games. This means that there are less fans interested in games, and therefore less profitable television and sponsor contracts to pay for the salaries of the players.
We know how much money is brought in to the state of Nevada from boxing. It's huge. And does money matter more than violence against women? I think to many people it does.
Brant Webb suggests that the solution to this problem is to implement a standalone domestic violence policy across NFL and MLB leagues to properly address the problems regarding domestic violence among professional sports teams. He claims that the current league policies don't properly combat issues of domestic violence among the leagues and instead serve in the best interest of sports.
So where do we go from here? What is being done to stop the domestic violence in sports? Thankfully, there have been programs created to attempt to combat the domestic violence found in sports. Activism can also be seen at the younger levels of education. A high school in Washington implemented a workshop to target young male athletes to teach them about domestic violence and sexual assault against women.
You're going to get a behavior. You're going to come up and you're going to place it on this line where you think it should go.
In one of the workshop exercises, players were asked to rank examples of physical abuse from the least egregious to the most.
Punching in the stomach while pregnant.
That's serious. I would put that on the most abusive. Because that is totally wrong. Why would you punch a woman in the stomach while they're pregnant?
Right.
I have the worst one. I have rape.
You have rape. You see these, thinking about these behaviors that sort of give an example of what domestic violence looks like.
Other activist groups have been created around the world. Footy Fans Against Sexual Assault is a fan advocate group in Australia that has worked with the sport leagues to make policy changes regarding violence. They successfully got two of the largest leagues in Australia to create policies in which primary prevention is key and how not to commit a sexual assault in the first place. Fan advocate groups have a place in improving the sports sphere in terms of violence perpetrated against women. In addition, it is the fans who are keeping the capitalist system of sport running, so they need to please the fans to keep making more money. Furthermore, with the rise of social media, groups such as this one will only continue to further their research.
Domestic violence continues to be downplayed by professional athletes, professional sports teams, and the media. We need to begin to take these issues more seriously. Leaders of all social institutions that contribute to the development and maintenance of female violence against women must participate in the efforts to combat domestic violence. The media needs to stop glossing over cases of domestic violence perpetrated by professional athletes in news reports. This only serves to perpetuate the dominant male-centered ideology. As well, the leagues need to start setting an example. As institutions which celebrate and capitalize on violence within sports, they need to send a clear message to the many viewers that violence, and specifically violence against women, is something that will not be tolerated. Leagues need to stop avoiding this issue and adopt a standalone domestic violence policy for athletes to be held to. Athletes must also act to increase the social costs of gender violence, create social norms that define violence against women as unacceptable, promote concepts of male self-control, responsibility, and accountability, as well as foster equitable, non-violent relationships. By creating awareness, we can put pressure on sports to have higher consequences for participation in domestic violence, to demonstrate that domestic violence is something that will not be tolerated. As citizens, we can continue to create activist groups against domestic violence, and take a stand together with victims of domestic abuse. With this, we hope to be able to see a future of sports without domestic violence.